Hello, webinar attendees. My name is Marisol Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Network Leadership with Campus Compact. We hope that you and your families and your communities are staying healthy and taking care of each other. We want to begin with a land acknowledgement. As a step towards honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation, Campus Compact seeks to acknowledge the traditional native lands on which we stand. Given that we are gathering for today's webinar from across the country, and maybe some from around the world, we invite you to acknowledge the ancestral, stolen, and unceded territory of the Native people where you're joining us from, and you can do that in the chat. I myself am participating from Chicago, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox, have also called this area home. The region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States resides in Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of this city and to celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways. We also want to recognize and stand in solidarity with those individuals who are continuing to call for racial justice and equitable communities and affirm that Black Lives Matter. We commit to move beyond words into programs and actions that fully embody a commitment to full participation and equity. So we're so happy to have you part of today's webinar titled Democracy in Action, How We Can Encourage and Safeguard Voting, which obviously is a really important topic for us. And our presenters will be introducing themselves shortly. I just want to make a couple of announcements. One, if you want to get the most out of your Campus Compact's membership, we're offering open houses to members to learn about great programs and resources available to faculty, staff, students, and senior leaders. We can also do an open house for your campus. So that might be something that you want to invite members from your campus community to participate in, and we're happy to schedule that with you. And I'll give you information in the chat later on how to do that. Also, we want to just promote some of our featured initiatives. We have, throw in the chat a link to some of those. We've got our Compact 22 conference coming up in March. Calls are open for presentations and proposals. In addition to that, our communities of practice are open. And you can check out our compact.org website to find out more about upcoming programming for this semester as well as this academic year. So now I'll turn it over to our presenters. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that we get to spend this hour together. My name is Betty Knighton. I'm the president of the National Issues Forum Institute. We'll tell you a bit more about what that is in a few minutes. And in that role, I have the opportunity to work with people around the country who are trying to promote practices of engaged citizenry and public engagement on the issues that impact our lives. And I've had the to see up close and personal the role of higher education in promoting that work for students, faculty, and members of their campus community, as well as the communities in which they're located. So I'm very appreciative to the work of higher education, which we want to explore more here today, and their connections to communities, and certainly appreciating so much that Campus Compact is providing these opportunities in these webinars for us to explore these issues together. So what I'd like to do is to tell you a little bit about what the flow of this will be. We want it to be an opportunity for you to learn more about these practices and concepts and a lot of resources that we want to share with you. And we also want you to have a chance to ask questions and comments. So please use the chat to do that. Marisol will be watching the chat and bringing some of those questions in a little bit later. So here's what we'll focus on today. First of all, we want to talk about what we mean by a deliberative forum, and we'll start that by just the deliberation itself. We'll start there. We want to show you the public framework that has been developed for use all around the country and is being used in many places around the country on safeguarding and encouraging voting. which is a public issue of great concern to many people, and in which there is really a great need for more people to be talking about how to do just that, safeguard and encourage voting. And we'll share resources about that as well. We want to give you some of the lessons that we've learned from each other around the country about strategies for convening and moderating deliberative discussions that can be productive and thought-provoking and effective in terms of setting directions for what we might do in our communities, states, and as a country as a whole. And then we want to make sure that we have time to reflect and to share with you a great deal of resources that we have that we'd love to share with you for discussions you want to have in your own classrooms, campuses, or in your communities. Before we start, though, we'd like to know a little bit more about who's here today and what, if any, experience you have with National Issues Forums. And so Marisol has been kind enough to create this poll, which she's going to ask you to complete, and then she'll share the results with us. So take a little bit of time to answer those questions. We want to know who's with us today. Are you a student, a faculty member, college or university staff? Are you with a community organization or something else that we didn't think of? And then have you ever participated in a National Issues Forum?
It looks like there's some problems with the poll, so let me try to relaunch it.
Okay.
It's all set now.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead and choose the correct response for each of the two answers that fits you. Thank you for taking the time to do that. I see we have quite a few people here who are with the college university staff and faculty. No students that I'm seeing on the poll yet, but maybe some will join us. And of course, we want to make this appropriate for them all. And I can also see that most of you have not participated in a National Issues Forum, but some of you have. We'll be sure to hopefully give you enough information. If you're completely new to this information, we want to make that available to you now, and then follow up email that Marisol will send you with some resources, and also know whatever questions might be in your mind, whether you're experienced with this kind of deliberative forum or not. So to go into what is a deliberative forum, I'll actually start, first of all, with just the idea of what is deliberation. And it's a word that's familiar to most people. I would say that most people, when they first think of the word deliberation, they probably think about what juries do when they listen to evidence, they weigh points of view that are being presented to them, and then they make a decision based on evidence that they've heard. Also, deliberation happens all the time in our own lives. It occurs quite naturally, and you have to make a tough decision. If you think of just any time in your life where you had to make a decision that involved more than just you, where other people were impacted, and you had to weigh different costs, different consequences, different merits of different approaches to whatever your decision would be, you've been deliberative. And so we are deliberative in our private lives. Often we don't have significant opportunities to be deliberative in our public lives. And so that's why many people are involved in creating opportunities in classrooms, on campuses, or connecting campuses to communities that allow people to be deliberative with one another, to learn different points of view on a public issue that impacts our lives, to consider what the downsides or the positive steps might be related to a certain way to address the issue, and to see if they can set directions for some form of public action. And those public actions can be anything from an individual mindset and behavior to something like a public policy creation, or things that organizations on campuses or in communities might take in order to address a public issue. So it's about informing our decision making and trying to make it more relevant, more effective, and more productive for people. As you can imagine, in a deliberative forum, you need some sort of a structure in order to allow that to happen. And so in deliberative forums, in national issues forums, there are frameworks that are developed through a great deal of public research to make sure that people with different points of view are represented, different action ideas are captured, where people have an opportunity, first of all, to explore their own views. And I've heard many students say that it was really helpful for them to be able to just have time to reflect on what they think themselves and why, but then also to learn from people who have different points of view and why they might. So it's very much an exercise in that kind of critical thinking and expansive thinking as well. In a deliberative forum, people have an opportunity to consider, as I mentioned, trade-offs and consequences of the actions that they might take to address the issue they care about. They acknowledge that there are agreements as well as disagreements, and that there will be challenges in almost any way forward, and to consider how to work through those and address them. And then to listen for any kind of emerging directions or next steps that might be taken. Depending on how long and how many deliberative forums people are in on a given issue, they may be able to work to making plans for what they might want to do next. They may end the discussion with feeling a great deal more informed about their own views and the views of other people as well. So we want to talk about national issues forums in particular. A lot of people do local versions of national issues forums in their own community. You'll hear some examples of that in this discussion today as well. But basically, when I think of national issues forums, I think of it as a network. I think of it as practices, and I think of it as issues. So it is a national network. We're so glad to partner with Campus Compact and many, many other organizations across the country as part of this network. People in local communities or on campuses determine what issues they want to talk about. They're locally convened, they're locally moderated, and yet we try to connect and learn from each other and share that throughout the country. The practices are based on nonpartisan, multi-perspective discussions. And so in any national issues forum, participants are going to explore not just the approach they favor the most, but other approaches to addressing a public issue, which may be ones that they disagree with or they're unfamiliar with, but the opportunity is there to expand their thinking about the issue and to understand the different points of view that exist and why. And then the issues are always of national scope, but they're relevant to local communities. And the one we're going to talk about today, voting, is a key example of the kind of issue that is discussed in a national issues forum, because it's important to people individually and in their local communities, but all around the country. The issue of safeguarding and ensuring elections is of paramount concern to so many people. So what I would like to do right now is to introduce you to a very wonderful colleague of ours, Carol Lindaman, who is with Winona State University in Minnesota. She is a professor in public administration. She has extensive experience with national issues forums with her students on her campus throughout Minnesota and in the many, many national higher education networks that Kara is a part of. So we're just really thrilled that Kara's with us, and I'll let her introduce more to you about the actual issue about safeguarding and ensuring elections. Thanks, Kara.
Wow. So thank you, Betty. As Betty said, I am very honored to be a member of the NIFI network. And what Betty failed to mention to you is she is the president of the National Issues Forum Institute. And so whenever I have the opportunity, I always defer to Madam President. So it's wonderful to be in the room with Betty again and to welcome you to our discussion on voting. And when we talk about democratic deliberation, I must first be authentic and begin with my personal stake as to why I think democratic deliberation, and particularly a deliberation on voting using NIFI resources, helps us do our jobs and live our lives a little better. So as a political scientist, right, we study voting, and we study it in a way that there's winners and losers, and there's a end goal, and it's very partisan and incredibly polarizing. It is also crushing to the soul to study voting behavior this way. And back in 2008, we not only were going through Campus Compact's Carnegie classification, but we were also, the American Democracy Project was introduced on our campus. And we began an intentional effort on how we are going to educate students as citizens on campus and in their communities. And this is when I was first introduced to Betty, NIFI, the Centers of Public Life, and the difference it can make in our students. And on our campus, for example, we used to have something called the Warrior Debates. And the Warrior Debates were something where we would invite students, primarily student life folks would tap into Student Senate and SGA, and they would take a topic or an issue and present pros and cons, and like Intelligence Square, we would vote and determine who was the winner and who was the loser. Since that, right, we have learned that in order to develop civic skills and capacities within our students, we have turned to the NIFI model of holding democratic deliberation. And on voting, how can we encourage and safeguard voting? It is the most salient topic out there. It's incredibly compelling to students as you get first time new voters. And you all know that we are in the midst of civic holidays. We just celebrated National Voter Registration Day. And so this is an issue that resonates with students. Now, just last week in our public service class, we train our students as moderators of these democratic deliberations, and they were tasked to go out and hold a forum, just informally, with their roommates, their friends, their families, just a small forum, and just to be introduced into practice how they may moderate something like that. They went into it thinking that it was going to be, as all the noise says, highly contentious, increasingly polarized, and the like. And by golly, they came back and their experience was drastically different. They had meaningful conversations. I had one student who talked about his forum with two roommates, and one roommate who didn't really know anything about voting, was uncertain, unsure of it. I don't know if you have many students on your campus like this. We certainly do. Heck, they're probably my own children in my household right now. And they found that having this kind of structure, as Betty shared, was very conducive to working through these concerns and coming to an area where there may be shared understanding. And certainly, as we know with this generation of student, space to work together to improve voting for all. So I only share this long story with you because National Issues Forum really does an intentional effort to frame the issue in three different holistic options. And in doing so, you are unable to see the right, the left, the Republican, the Democratic. You cannot fall into that partisan polarized trap. Approach one is just an example. You saw the three different options. Approach one is make it easier to register to vote. And if you look at these actions and these drawbacks, it says, okay, we could offer in-person early voting, right? And as you know, civic holiday, vote early. I just received the email today on registering our campus for that. But the vote early, however, right, the drawback that someone needs to consider, are they willing to accept this trade-off? And it gives people a challenge to think, you know, it's not just easy. There is things that you may have to give up if you are going to advocate for X, Y, and Z. And that's just the reality of it. And we go through each of these actions with their possible drawbacks, and the moderators, you know, will facilitate those conversations. And you come to a place, well, what kinds of actions is this group willing to accept? What actions are off the table because they cannot accept the consequence or the trade-off. I think if we were to look at the effects of deliberation, especially on young people, and we teach a lot of pre-service teachers, we know that there needs to be a better way to get people to talk about these highly salient and sometimes contentious, we like to call them wicked problems. This is a process and a structure to provide that safe space, that inviting and welcoming space, and to really enable and invite voice and action from our students. So it has been transformational, not only to my personal professional career, but really our university and how students look at this like, wow, this is something I am going to do in the public health field. This is something I am going to do in the schools. And it bridges the academic and the student affairs side. And we can talk more about how we've intentionally tried to bridge those silos as well. But Betty, if you want to go on and continue with convening voting forums, please.
Thank you, Kara. And as Kara mentioned, that approach where we were just showing you one graphic from the first part of the discussion guide, just to give you an idea of what we mean by actions and trade-offs. And there are other approaches. For example, how do we make sure that elections are secure, which is not necessarily in conflict with the first one, but a different way of addressing or prioritizing the issue. And then there's another approach that says, what else can we do in order to give people better choices, which has to do with how elections are structured and the Electoral College and other elements of our election system beyond what happens right at the ballot box. So we'll when this is over, we will be sending you an email in the next couple of days. Marisol is going to send out to you an email that includes the full-length discussion guide and the other support materials to go with it so that you can see the full framework. But it's based on what you saw there and the idea that people will be learning more about different approaches and also considering trade-offs and drawbacks of moving in various directions. But before you can have to have a forum and before you can use a framework, you have to have the people present. And so we thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about the convening of these discussions. Now, obviously, if you're interested in having a deliberative discussion in a classroom, the convening has pretty much been done for you. The students are there and you're building it into the coursework or the goals of your course, and you have students ready to participate. But many people also like the idea of having these deliberative discussions that are campus-wide. And so they're not with a certain set of students, but throughout the campus. It could be with students from many different majors. It could be with different organizations, different faculty, staff, administrators, and others also want to go beyond that even and invite people from the community to participate. Many times campuses and community organizations partner in order to have discussions in which higher ed provides the civic space and a bit of civic infrastructure, so to speak, so that the community can come together. So whichever way that you're doing your discussions, whether they're on campuses, in communities, across boundaries, we've been seeing this year in particular many discussions that are taking place because they're online. People from many different states, different parts of the country, different parts of the world can be in deliberative forums together. Whether they are in person, which some of us are able to do now in our own communities, or online for a variety of reasons, whether it's because of the concerns about COVID or other reasons why people need to be talking online instead of in person. It's possible in all of these settings. And so we want to just give you a general idea about what a broad outreach might be, might look like, and how you might go about it. Okay, today's the webinar. We all know where we are now. If you wanted to do this beyond a classroom setting, as I said, in a classroom, the outreach is really done there for you. But if you're doing it, most people pull together some kind of a planning team. And the planning team could be people from different sectors of your campus or from a campus and community connection together. And then, of course, outreach is the key to getting people involved. And so for most people, the outreach is through a whole variety of mechanisms, including word of mouth, which I think is the most effective one, but having people invited who have a connection have people doing the inviting who have a connection to the people that they're inviting. So make sure you have a lot of different people trying to reach out. We're trying to have people with different points of view in the room. And in some cases, that's more challenging than in others. But the broader the outreach and the more different kinds of organizations or the more different kind of backgrounds that you're bringing into that outreach, the more likely you are to have people in the room who genuinely have different points of view about the issue, which is a really valuable learning experience and a very valuable public work experience in order to learn from those and to see if directions can be found for moving forward. And then the discussions occur. Some people have one discussion. Some people have multiple discussions. Some people have multiple discussions and then a final discussion afterwards in order to set directions for what they might want to do locally. And so those all lead to the next steps that people want to take. So there's a lot of flexibility. There's no one right way to do this, but the idea of having some core team that's doing the planning and helping with the outreach, and then one or more discussions that are participated in by people who've been welcome to participate because their views are valued, not just that they're welcome, but they're needed in order to be a part of the discussion. That's usually the message, I think, that makes people feel that they're really going to be respected and that they're going to be heard in the discussion as well. And so just a general idea, you'll have many more ideas yourself, but usually when we think about people who are on a planning team, especially for discussions that are going to be campus and community connected, educational institutions, of course, and I know most of you on this call are with educational organizations, civic organizations, libraries, nonprofits, government agencies, volunteer groups, faith groups, the private sector, and that's just a partial list. I have seen much work done with each one of these sectors individually, but the most exciting work, I think, sometimes occurs whenever there's a partnership between two or among many of these organizations. So you might want to consider that in the opportunities that you're providing for your students and for your campus as well, and the service that it provides whenever you're able to make that kind of connection among many different sectors or organizations. I also want to mention that many of these discussions in this past year have been happening online. And that may be a necessity where you are, or it may be a desire. Kara has done a lot of work with online deliberation in a variety of platforms. I'm going to turn it back to Kara to tell you a little bit more about her experience with that and what we've seen from others.
Thank you, Betty. I'm not sure if all of us are convening courses and campus in person or online, if we're forever going to be in a hybrid model or not. But it's been a real opportunity to develop and to test, right, certain remote learning strategies and online platforms. And what COVID has done so much, but what it has done for us is that it really launched what we call the Common Ground for Action, or CGA platform, as a tool in which we can hold deliberative forums online and remotely. Now, when if you remember, in spring of 2020, immediately many of us were pushed to remote learning. Immediately, one of the ways in which we could engage our students was to convene online deliberations. In the fall, when we didn't go back, we realized that this is a tool that provides a good opportunity not just to replace what in-person deliberation may do, but actually to enhance it and to complement it. Online deliberation can really be done over Zoom like this, which would mimic or replicate a similar in-person experience. If we use a Common Ground for Action, which I have to tell you is a very sophisticated yet highly accessible platform. And what's even more special, I think, about it, if you're in higher education like me, is that it is free for anyone to use. And so it makes it incredibly accessible. It's a text-based platform, which allows, if we're having discussions over voting or other things that may make people feel a little uncomfortable, a text-based platform allows you to be a little bit more anonymous. So you're not seeing people on the screen, and they can share, right, their personal stake and their identities as they are comfortable or see fit. We started this. I have to give you an example, because I think I always just say, oh, give us an example. So when we started remote, the CGA, I think it was, 5-7 years ago, much, pre-pandemic. And I have a colleague who taught at the time at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I was like, well, how cool is that? I mean, doesn't every student and me want to visit Alaska sometime? And the idea that would happen in my lifetime was pretty small. And so we thought, you know what would be interesting, because we're always concerned about being, at least I am, in our own echo chambers, right? Wouldn't it be interesting to have a forum, a deliberation across our campuses? And so my colleague and I, we developed a forum, and we've done so many that I can't even remember what the first one really was, the issue, because it really didn't matter, because the idea that you can put students, very different, drastically different students, in the same forum without physically having to be there and costing an incredible amount of money was something that we experimented with, and then we have never turned back. And so I would encourage you that instead of worrying, like how much does it cost, especially with the COVID protocol, how many people can you fit in the room? We continue to do this on the MLK Days of Service. We continue to do it on Veterans Day. We continue to do it on University Improvement Day, Constitution Day. Hold these forums as a way to bring people together and to talk about things like voting, free speech in the inclusive campus, fraternity and sorority life in the inclusive campus. These are all issues that we grapple with in this format, because then, right, when we are tested, we have a method of approaching this in a very civil and productive manner. So I would just, Darla, we have that example of the state of New York, right? Yeah, the State University of New York. So last year, when we went online, we have a great colleague, Vertus Robinson, who organized deliberation on voting across the SUNY system. And as you can see, within the great state of New York, just like Minnesota, there is a lot of diversity of campuses, of students, of university communities, and they brought together on Constitution Day a deliberation on voting. And Betty had an opportunity to attend those. So I don't know, Betty, if you had any takeaways that you wanted to share or observations?
One thing that was really powerful to me, first of all, there were 187 students, I think, in this Zoom. Of course, we used the breakout feature so people could have more small group discussions within that group of 187. I think there were 37 different campuses represented. What was really remarkable was how many students at the end mentioned how important it was to them to hear from students beyond those on their own campus. Not that that wasn't important, of course it was, but in a state as diverse as New York, and most of our states are quite diverse, that there were students, one student in particular said, well, I spent most of my life in Manhattan. I go to school in Manhattan. I've really never had a chance to talk to any people my age from upstate New York, a different part of the state that he hadn't traveled to and didn't know anybody from. And so the opportunity, even within that state, in order to get people together from different geographical regions, in order to feel more connected, it also allowed them to think think of what could New York as a state do moving forward, as well as what they might do on their local campus or in their local community. There were actually several examples of this kind of work that happened during the year. We showed this one because we just really love the graphic of all these schools and what it represented in terms of that experience for those students.
Thank you, Betty. If we segue now and move into how to moderate these forums, we do several workshops and webinars on training moderators or facilitators for deliberation. And my experience has been on my campus is we invest in training students as moderators because we think that it introduces them to skills that they can use for a lifetime. And these are, career skills. These are community-based skills. And we like to have students be trained as moderators, and then students mentor and peer train new students as moderators. And so we get kind of this pipeline going. And I think students find, I really do think that it is a process. It's a learning process for sure, but it's a process that students can take away and celebrate when they graduate. I apologize. I have, oh my goodness, Betty, I am home alone. Not like, yeah, so. Okay.
No, you're not alone. I think you have some dogs there.
Yeah, well, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just yelled at her. Good luck with that. Okay. So when you are training as a moderator, the best thing we advise is you set an inclusive tone. And in setting an inclusive tone, that means that you are unbiased and neutral. And this is probably a challenge for any and all of us. So especially for our political scientists, right? So our job is not to evaluate who is right or wrong. It is to invite everyone to participate in an inviting and welcoming way. So no one person's voice dominates, and everybody has the opportunity and the expectation to participate. Doing that takes a little bit of homework. I mean, right? You have to develop some deliberative questions on how to entice that investment by your participants, how to create that space where every voice is welcomed and every voice is valued. And then also on how to evaluate and to take away what just happened. And so I would like to share, Darla, can we share what that kind of flow chart looks like in terms of moderating a deliberative forum? And this is really sweet. And this is provided within each of the NIF issue guides. So if you look at the voting issue guide, you would see this figure to help you keep track and how to pace and how to develop and train facilitators. You introduce the issue, you review the guidelines. Now, the guidelines, ground rules, community agreements are ways in which to create an equitable, a fair, and an equal space where everyone will participate. This is where I think most students find themselves. This is the first time that they've been asked to create this space. Certainly it is challenging, but it is also very, very easy for students to do it. And I'm just going to give you one example. Betty mentioned that we like to encourage on campuses sometimes community involvement and participation in our forums. Back in, oh gosh, my goodness, it's been 10 years ago, we had a president who retired from our university. And in her retirement party, she held an NIF deliberation on higher education. She invited the entire region of the state and even people from the metro area and the capital who wanted to celebrate her retirement, but she had them participate in a forum. They were moderated by students. Students were included, but so were business members, board of trustee members, and the like. And that created, right? A student created that equitable, inviting space where a student's participation and a board of trustees participation were equally valued. And so that's a pretty special thing to create that kind of context. From that invitation, you like to develop one's personal stake or what brings them to the forum. Now in higher education, you have to be careful here because the first thing students may say is because I have to, right? Because it's a course requirement. So you have to really ask a good question to get them to see themselves. Why would this matter to you? And how has it affected you, your neighbors, your family, or how may it affect them? The three options, you go through each option given equally, depending on the time period for your forum, and you develop them or you discuss them entirely holistic, going through each action and the drawback or the trade-off and consider them separately. And then finally, you review and reflect. I like to say, like, where, they say, where was there shared understanding? Where is there room for us to, as Betty had in that figure, to work together? What do we do next? And then also to be very cognizant, whether you do it remotely or in person, there are people who need to be in that room that aren't there. And I think we all need to acknowledge that no matter how we structure, invite, create, wish, want, that there are people who are missing from that space. And if they were there, what may they say? What do you think they would say? Not representative, but the best possible. So we will move to, I think we are going to highlight the review of guidelines next, right, Darla? And with the guidelines and just creating that inviting, welcoming space where everyone is valued and everyone is encouraged to speak and to share. I always say that, in my field in political science, when someone's talking, you're not intentionally, thoughtfully listening. You're just waiting for them to stop so then you can interject your idea or your opinion or your debate, pro or con. This is a serious investment where you have to say, those awkward silent spaces, those are just as important. You have to give people time, you have to give people space to think, to reflect, and then to contribute. So your listening skills, right, are something which need to be developed and to be enhanced. I think you can look at what we call these community agreements, but one thing we do is when we introduce these, we do ask people, are you willing to accept these? Are we all willing to accept these and to agree that these will be the ground rules moving forward? And are there other ones that we should also add, right, to make this space as welcoming, inviting, and participatory as possible? Betty does a much better job at talking about the questions. Betty actually taught me how to do this some years ago, so I will turn it over to Betty to ask those tough questions.
We thought we would just put in some examples of the kind of questions that we've seen people use so effectively to promote a deliberative mindset and a deliberative discussion. And as I mentioned, we're going to send these slides to you. We also have other resources that have a lot more sample questions that we'll be able to connect you with as well. But basically, you just get the idea. When you're trying to connect to the concerns of participants, you might ask something like, how would this action affect your life? or the lives of other people. If you want them to examine some of the potential consequences, you might ask them about downsides. Sometimes the most effective question is to ask them the downside of the option they favor the most, because then they have to change their way of thinking, not to change their mind, but to have a different mindset about how someone else might think. If you want to ask them to consider trade-offs, you might ask, what would you give up in order to achieve this? And if you want to promote interactions, could someone give an example to illustrate what someone else just said? There are any number of good questions that we're constantly learning as we listen to people. Of course, you can make this very specific to the voting issue. You just put in the context of voting and whatever issue about voting you're being asked to examine at that time. And then we also want to show you some example questions that you can ask in the reflective period. I think one of the most important parts of a deliberative discussion is this reflection at the end, because the issues are so big and they're so compelling and they're so important. You could spend all of your time on any one particular point, but the moderator moves the discussion along so that people do have a chance to reflect on what they've said together, what they've thought together. And so questions like this are ones looking back over the entire discussion. What areas of greatest agreement did you hear? What are the most challenging aspects? Of course, you want to also identify the areas of greatest disagreement. This is a question that one of our colleagues in Georgia suggested. If a reporter were describing today's discussion to the public, how would you want it described? So that has to put you in the mindset of somebody who's thinking globally or holistically about the conversation and not just your own individual point of view. What next steps might be taken? Again, these are just some of a few, but that part of the discussion is really where people are able to synthesize the various points of view they've heard and consider how they might want it to affect their own behavior or how they might want to use it to affect any changes they might want to be a part of on their campus, in their community, or in the nation. I just want to take a last couple minutes before we turn to any questions you might have to make sure you know about some of the resources that are available. All of these are available. They're complimentary. We are happy to send you links to them, and a lot of these can be found at the NIF website, which is nifi.org. The whole discussion guide, we've just shown you bits and pieces today, but the discussion guide is there as a downloadable PDF. There's a guide for the moderator of the discussion. There's a discussion starter video, which is a few minutes long, but it helps kind of lay out the key concerns about each one of the approaches and gives people a good overview before they start talking. Issue-based slides. You've seen a couple of them. I'm going to show you a couple more here in just a minute. So that, especially if you're doing this online, so that you don't have to pull all the pieces out of the guide yourself, we've created these slides so that you can just screen share and show relevant information during the forum. And then there's a questionnaire that people can fill out in person or online to gather the insights that you might want to see from your own discussion. And we also appreciate receiving those results nationally so that we can reflect on what the country as a whole is saying about the issue. Just a couple of things I want to show you that what we've seen is that people really sometimes benefit from localizing the materials. And so you might want to consider whatever state or community you're having the discussion in, there are local election laws, there are local voting practices, there are local information about who turns out and who doesn't to vote and why that might be. And so let me just give you a couple examples from the discussion guide. Of course, the discussion guide is put together on a national level. And so what people find interesting is, well, how does the US voter turnout compare to the rest of the, to some other countries that have voter turnout in the same range or higher? And so this is one of the graphics that's in the discussion guide, but I can also imagine, let's say with Kara's students in Minnesota, they might be interested to know how voter turnout in their part of Minnesota compares to other parts of Minnesota. So there would have to be some local research, an assignment for maybe some of your students to look into some of the election laws in their own state or some of the voting practices or turnout. This one, for example, I like because pretty much what happens, everybody who sees this immediately looks at their own state. I know I'm looking at West Virginia right now because that's my own state. Just to see, in this case, it has to do with eligible to vote, states that have eligible voters automatically registered versus ones that don't. And so you might have students look into that. In many states, county by county, there are different regulations. And so this is what I mean by localizing. You can take some of the graphics and the information that are in the guide. I've often heard Kara talk about Circle as a resource for a lot of great information about youth voter turnout in particular. So there are a lot of resources for that as well. Okay, so let's use the last bit of time that we have together to see what questions you might have, what comments you might have. We have a small enough group that if you want, you can put your question or comment in the chat, or you can just since it's such a small enough group, you could just, just let us know by putting the raise hand feature up. If Mira's also able to see everybody's Zoom feature. Okay. Tina wants to know the exact page on the NIFI site where she's to find the slides. Darla created these slides. And Darla had everything to do with getting them on the site. So I'm going to turn to Darla for that question.
We will have these slides up in a day or so, and you'll be able to find them on the dedicated page for the issue guide that we're talking about today. And I will put a direct link in just a few seconds in the chat box to the materials.
Okay, thank you, Darla. Also, we're going to compile a lot of these things and get that to Marisol, and she has all your email addresses, and so she'll send you the direct links to all these things as well. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah. I have the email ready to go when I get those. So
okay, thank you. Yeah. Any other question? Well, let me ask you then, do any of you have any, those of you who said that you have some experience with national issues forums, have you, is there anything that you'd want to add to this conversation today about how you've seen this work on your campus or with your students?
Betty, John just gave an excellent example of a deliberative forum helped us convince the president of our college Republicans to collaborate with Young Dems and other organizations, including the Institute for Civic Engagement. John, well done. As the advisor for the college Republicans and the college Democrats on our campus, I think that is wonderful.
Yeah. That's inspiring. And I will say, I have seen similar things happen among people that never expected that they would have something in common with or share some purpose with people from an organization that advocates something differently than they do, or from, for that matter, even a part of town where residents tend to have a different way of looking at an issue than another part of town. We have a lot of divisions in our communities, based on where people live at times. And so I've seen people who have forums where people from different neighborhoods come together, perhaps different aspects of the campus, people that are involved in different part of student life coming together and realizing that they had more in common with other people than they expected. And they might even realize that the people they thought they agreed with the most actually do have some different points of view, that we're pretty complicated creatures, and that it's really important to look at the whole person and not just one particular aspect of what you think they might say. Laura wants to know, are there opportunities to participate in online forums to allow me to learn more? Actually, right now, and Darla, you might want to correct me on this, I think online we have posted some of the national issues forums that are getting ready to take place on the Common Ground for Action platform. That's the platform that Kara was describing before. Do we have some of those posted on the NIFI website right now, Darla?
We do. There is National Week of Deliberation coming up, and that is starting the week of November 1st. So I'm sure if you're interested in participating in that, please reach out to me, and I will get you in contact with our colleague who is leading that deliberation, and she would be happy to get you involved if you'd like to join in.
Yeah. And thank you. Thanks, Darla. And thanks, Kara. Kara listed where you can see those events that we're talking about, the ones that are starting in November. That might be a really good place to start, Laura, because you'll get a sense of the structural elements. It's a more text-based platform. And so you'll get a chance of you'll also get an experience of the weighing and the deliberating that's very visceral in that Common Ground for Action platform. A lot of people also have forums using the Zoom platform for the face-to-face feature that we're experiencing right now. Usually those are locally organized and not necessarily the national audience, but if there are opportunities for those, we'll certainly post those as well. Yeah. Darla, your email address, please. Yeah. Let's see. Marisol, am I missing anything as I'm looking through these questions?
So far, no, but if someone wants to speak, they can raise their hand and I can allow them to speak.
Oh, okay. Any other particular questions? Either you raise your hand or put it in the chat and we'll get to you. Well, if not, then I just want to say that this past year has been year and a half now, has been challenging, I know, for everybody that's involved in higher ed and for most of us who are working and care so much about the work of higher ed. And so I really appreciate you all taking out the time. And I appreciate Jennifer raising her hand and having a question. So let's do that before we say goodbye.
I just have my biggest fear in organizing one of these is nobody shows up. And how do you ensure, or we've also been charged with trying to reach more students who are less likely to be politically engaged.
Yes.
So how do we make this attractive to those more students?
Well, that is the key question, I think, is how to make people feel welcome and that it's a valuable experience for them to come. So I think the first thing is if you could have a variety of people doing the inviting so that the invitation is more likely to come from an organization or a person they know and trust. Because for many people, coming into a discussion on a compelling public issue, especially one that can be controversial, and let's face it, almost every compelling public issue is controversial, it's a leap of faith. It's like, well, how do I know that when I cross the threshold and walk into that space or click my Zoom link and get into that online room, that my point of view is going to be welcomed, that I'm going to be respected, that the point of it is going to be to understand each other and to think about how we would make decisions together rather than to combat each other. And so I think the idea of having multiple people doing the inviting, I know when we have community forums in my community, we always have people from different backgrounds, different income levels, different parts of town doing the inviting. And so on a campus, there's those elements as well in terms of people that might relate to this department or this unit or this professor and might not know the others. And so I think that's the best thing. Also, the language that you use, telling people that not only are they welcomed, but they are really necessary. Their point of view is a really important part of the conversation so that they know that being a part of this conversation is kind of a civic service that they provide to the rest of their campus or geographical community by being there. I've certainly seen those strategies work really well whenever a variety of people are doing the inviting. And word of mouth is, honestly, I know it's more time consuming, but it tends to be the most effective, or personal emails or personal contacts. Having said that, I have been in forums where 3 people showed up and I was one of them. So it doesn't always turn out beautifully, but I have to say, even the conversation among those 3 people was a pretty interesting conversation. But I've also been in forums where there were so many people that showed up that parents were sitting in the windowsills and we had to pull down bleachers and we had to use extra rooms because there was such a vital interest in whatever that particular issue happened to be. So you give it your best effort, and usually you have to kind of build up some by word of mouth, some capacity to get this outreach out there. But thanks for that question, Jennifer. Oh, Darla, you want to say a word about the microgrants? Thanks.
Sure. I just went, our partner Up to Us, who is also an organization that has campuses or chapters on campuses throughout the United States. They partner with NIFI. They helped us co-create an issue guide on youth and opportunity, but they have a wonderful micro grant program that's open to faculty, students, or administrators from any US-based college or university. So if a student wants to hold a forum and they would like some cash to help them organize the forum, and even a little bit of it can go for their moderating efforts. They offer $150, and it's a really simple application to fill out. There's more information on our website, and that offer runs through June of 2022. It is limited to the issue guides that they endorse. So there's youth and opportunity, a house divided, nation in debt, and healthcare. So that the student or faculty member would need to hold the forum on one of those 4 issues.
Yes. Thanks so much for bringing that up, Darla. Up to Us is very interested in kind of applying an economic lens. And so these 4 issues are ones that they feel have a dramatic impact on our economic well-being. So that's why those 4 issues. And these grants are available to students, to faculty, to administrators, to other people on the staff of colleges and universities. So we hope you'll take advantage of those. So please be on the lookout for an email from Marisol. I'm going to turn it back to Marisol for the closing comment.
Thank you so much. So we are at time. We so appreciate the National Issues Forum and our presenters for sharing such an important topic with our attendees today, and look for the email. And until next time, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.